Perfect. Welcome everybody from the audience side and the esteemed panelists. And it's a wonderful afternoon, and I'm sure from respective cities and states wherever you all are, safe and sound with your loved ones. So welcome once again to this very invigorating session, which is titled "Building Gender Parity at Indian Enterprise." My name is Rishi, and in the course of a few minutes, I will be introducing the team available with us right now on the panel and the conversation. So the initiative of this webinar is a continuation on the webinar series which GI Group has started, which is webinars on staffing and talent practices to ensure sustainable work, which was the first one which went live a couple of months ago. It's a part of the Conversations on Work series, which the GI Group has instituted for the benefit of the entire ecosystem. And today's topic is very pertinent. It is something which has been discussed over a period of time, and there will be a lot of contemporary thoughts which will be coming from the esteemed panelists today. And as per the diversity benchmark report on 2019, which studies gender parity in Indian enterprise, and they did a survey across 300 plus companies, they believe that only a quarter of the Indian workforce is female, which is quite a departure from what is the global level of benchmark, which we'll be discussing over a period of time. And they also believe that in 2016, the participation of women in the Indian workforce was around 32%, which actually has come down between 20 to 25% now. So that is something which is a context of conversation. And the intent is that to build a deeper sense of responsibility to this important work element. And as I mentioned, it is a series which is run by the GI Group. And in the intent of improving gender parity, the conversation will continue. But let me just introduce you to Upasana Raina, the Director of Human Resource from GI Group in India. She joined the group in 2003 and played an instrumental role in scaling up the HR department as that business has grown in the last 19 years. And while shortlisting the right talent, she has also maintained a perfect equilibrium of the quality of talent and the sustainable business models along with the young and the organization. And she has been addressing the challenges of diverse workforce, with GI Group being a preferred employer and employer of choice when it comes to professionals looking at diversity and inclusion as a parameter to join an organization. And it is very interesting to know, Pasna, that you are also the net qualified. And for me, academicians like me, it is aspirational. And you did an education from Isabel College, Lucknow, and you earned your master's degree also from Lucknow. So I would invite you to, share your context about today's conversation for a few minutes, and for that I can get into introducing the panel. So over to you, Pasna.
Thank you, Rishi, for setting the context and really helping us spread the concept of sustainable work. Good afternoon, everyone, esteemed panelists and the audience and our moderator. And before we really start this meeting and this interesting conversation, we would really like to take a moment to explain the concept of sustainable work as we see it as GI Group. At GI Group, our mission is to contribute to the evolution of the labor market and to emphasize on the personal and social value of work. And sustainable work is a concept that basically focuses on the social impact of work. We look at it from three aspects, or it has three stakeholders, I would say. People on one side, business or corporates like us on the other side, and then we have our society and institutions. And each of these stakeholders have their own set of responsibilities to ensure an ecosystem that takes care of the social and economic and security needs of the people. When we say people, in this whole framework, it's about developing the skills of the multi-generational workforce to meet the needs of the future market. When we say organization, it's the way we see it, it's about innovation of operating models and management in response to the changed environment. And when we say society and institutions, it's primarily about creating an inclusive workforce. And while our first webinar, which Rishi, you moderated very well for us, was about talent practices to ensure sustainable work, the second one in this series that we are doing today is about building gender parity at Indian enterprises. And we have this very esteemed and nice panelists here. And before we really go into this conversation, I would really want to share a small personal experience that I had earlier this year. Last year, I think we were in 2020, while most of us were operating from home, in front of our families, meetings happening all together. One day my 11-year-old son asked me, so what, you keep talking about this manpower plan and manpower budgeting. What is this manpower plan? So I told, I told him, so manpower plan is, in the year we decide to do certain amount of work, how many people do you need? So then his next question was, so do you hire only men in your organization? I said, no, we have 50% of our workforce as women. So why do you call it manpower and why is it not women power? So it was a very small but a very, very insightful observation, I would say. And that got me to the thinking that, okay, but probably for our own, I think HR terminologies, we need to make it more gender neutral so that, of course, that's one aspect, because we don't realize it's so naturally ingrained in the whole ecosystem. And that could be one reason why we are still struggling to maintain gender parity in our country. So with that, I would want to hand over the stage to Rishi. And thanks again to all of you for being here today.
Upasana, thank you very much. I think, as you mentioned, the next generation is extremely, extremely curious to understand, how the gender play out happens in the ecosystem. And I think we owe it to them to ensure that we also practice neutrality. So I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our panel briefly, starting with Ian Hari, or Hari as you may all know. So Hari is an engineer MBA from IIT Madras and IIM Calcutta. He's the HR head for Big Basket as one of the hats that he dons. He is an author, he's an angel investor, he's an advisor to founders and VCs, mentor to startup accelerators, columnist, and still, in a day, how much he achieves is quite commendable. And he's played an active role in shaping the startup ecosystem in the country, respected as a thought leader as well as an influencer. And he spent the last 2 decades as part of leadership teams of high growth startups, and all 5 of which have achieved successful exits, including listing at NASDAQ. And he's authored 7 books, and out of which a couple of names that I know are the Saying No to Jugaad, I think something which was extremely, extremely popular and on everybody's tongue, and Only to Unicorn and Diversity Beyond Tokens. It's tokenism. So I hope I'm able to pronounce it correctly. But Hari, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you very much for giving us your time, and with the intent of the great work that you keep on doing with startups, I think there will be a lot of contemporary conversation on what's happening in that space. And let me take this opportunity to now introduce Sangeeta Gupta. Now, Sangeeta is a senior vice president with NASSCOM. Welcome, Sangeeta. And you are the chief strategy officer and senior VP for NASSCOM, and started your career over 3 days ago with NASSCOM. And ever since I've worked towards strengthening the association, I think NASSCOM is one organization the whole world knows India with. So compliments to making it reach that level. And she has enhanced interactions with NASSCOM members, the government, the media towards NASSCOM objectives of being a catalyst for the growth of Indian software and services industry. And that brings a very strong element of what's happening in technology and gender diversity and inclusion. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot from your experience over there. And let me move on quickly to Amit Chincholikar, who's the global CHRO of Tata Consumer Products. Amit, welcome, and wonderful to have you here. And post completing his master's in human resource from Symbiosis Institute of Business Management, Amit has worked for more than 2 decades with organizations such as Tata Sons, Aditya Birla Group, and Mercer Consulting. He has experience across all HR domains, including M&As, HR strategy, integrations, talent, learning, compensation, and business partnership roles. So from our perspective, I think our expectations also get risen that how does gender diversity and inclusion get played in all these parameters, because you've had a very, very holistic approach to the life that you are leading in the human capital domain. So thank you very much, Amit, for joining us here. And my indeed pleasure to invite Avneet to the conversation. Avneet Hora, thank you very much. Avneet is the head of HR and board member for Unisys in India, and she has over 2.5 decades of experience, having worked with HP, ABN AMRO, and Bank of America in the past. And I learned, very early, but the hard way, that it is Hewlett Packard, not Helvet Packard. So there has always been that pronunciation about HP. And since I was with HCL and we had a joint venture, I think I lost some marks in my appraisal as well for not pronouncing the company right, but now I get it right nowadays. And you've led multiple HR cross-functional programs, and strength is to collaborate and work across businesses and boundaries. And you think and adapt quickly to shifting priorities and delivering results with integrity. And I think in the last 2 years, what has happened, shifting gears and changing pivots has been like the nature of the day and the nature of the beast. So I'm sure we have a lot of information to learn from you. And Katyayani, I will take the liberty of talking to you as Katy, as you mentioned that it's more an easier way to probably say, but fondly known as Katy, as your introduction says. And you're a passionate HR leader with almost 2 decades of corporate experience, an alumnus of Delhi School of Economics, and right now currently the area head at South Asia for Maersk. And your diversified experiences across industries and conglomerates in shipping, logistics, process outsourcing, performance enhancement solutions, consumer durables, and you've been able to have a very balanced approach towards inclusiveness, and you're a certified coach and a mindful meditation practitioner. Now, the sector that you represent is extremely, I think we all enjoy the benefits of that sector, but do we really know a lot about it? At least, I'm still a bit naive to it. So it will become a very, very interesting conversation to hear from you. So all of you, again, from GI Group and myself, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to speak with all of you. And let's begin the conversation with you, Hari. And a contemporary topic which sometimes is considered obvious but very seldom discussed is in terms of looking at entrepreneurship and building gender diversity. So encouraging entrepreneurship for women and their economic participation are always closely linked in terms of the gender gap issue. And in the startup ecosystem, since you have seen new age organizations developing into becoming even listed in NASSCOM of the world, how does this gender parity situation especially look like? And when people talk about the gig economy, where they say there are now so many people getting into delivery, so many people getting into customer support, they generally have a feeling that anybody who comes to deliver is predominantly a man. Not they really say people, even in say Ola, Uber for that matter, people say in our entire year maybe we would have had one female who would have served our cause. So in this situation, looking at the gig economy, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, how does what is your experience on gender diversity, bridging gender diversity, and how does the government funded ventures like yours and private institutions like investors really give merit to it? A long question, but I'm sure we have a lot to learn from you. Over to you, Hari.
Great. So I think maybe it deserves an equally long answer, Rishi. So, startups as well as more mature companies are part of a larger society, and therefore in some ways do mirror the state of affairs in the larger society. So, but before I respond to very specific questions about, women entrepreneurs, the gig workforce, let me just step back a little and talk a little bit about how complex this subject of gender diversity is. If we take a very simplistic approach to gender diversity, then companies will end up taking tokenism measures, and that's not really good. So I think some in-depth understanding the historical context, the social context in terms of how this has evolved is always very helpful. So for instance, even in a country like the US, women did not have equal rights until the Civil Rights Bill was passed in 1964. And in a country like India, 1947 onwards, of 1950 onwards, at least on paper, women had equal rights as per the Constitution. It was laid out in the Constitution. But in America, it took almost 200 years for them to be declared formally as being equal. And even that was not declared in the first draft. It was equality based on race, based on color of skin, based on so many things, but gender was still not included. The feminists had to really fight for it to get that included. And before the Civil Rights Bill was passed, women found it impossible to get a credit card until their husband signed off that, they are entitled to a credit card and they would back them up. So I think, the struggle for women has been a very long drawn affair. There is a big social context to this as well. And just as we all thought, we are making progress and, the gender issue is gradually being settled, we are having more and more women at the workplace, we suddenly had the Me Too, issue erupt. And it erupted in the US, it came to India, and then we figured out, that many of the victims were not just helpless women from the lower startup society, but they were probably, some of the more accomplished women, some of the more, successful women who were, victim of this male power to dominate or wanting to desperately dominate. So I think we took 2 steps forward, we're taking 1 step backwards. We are seeing this everywhere. Now, let me just come back to the specific question of startups and, entrepreneurs. So I think, this concept of gig work as representing the new age startups is not necessarily a complete picture, because like every other industry, even the new age startups include all kinds of workforce. There are people who are doing deliveries, and people who are doing deliveries typically are on a gig model. Whereas there are several other people employed by startups. They could be working in warehouses if they're blue collar categories. They could be picking and packing orders. They could be tech, folks working in the corporate office. So a variety of people. And I think the problem about gender gap is very, very specific to each category. It's not the same at all. So for instance, when it comes to blue collar workers, the biggest problem we face is that the kind of background that women are recruited from are very different from the backgrounds that women folks in corporate offices are drawn from. So women who are in the blue collar category, they come from a background where sometimes they're often used to being exploited. They don't even know that they need to complain. They have a certain set of rights. So for that category of workforce, emphasizing and communicating to them consistently that you have a certain set of rights and there is a proper recourse, and implementing that on the ground very effectively, that is very, very critical to creating a gender friendly workplace. So for a company like Big Basket, which employs 35,000 blue collar workers spread across the country, ensuring that when a woman packer joins a small warehouse or a store in Nashik, on the first day, there is the head of the store or the head of the warehouse who meets up with her and assures her of her rights and the people that she can approach if those rights are violated is very critical. So execution on the basics is very important to create an equal workplace, because if you do that, if they get the kind of respect that they would want, then that would attract other women also to come and join this workplace. So I think situation is different for different categories. And also clubbing women entrepreneurs as one big bracket is not very helpful, because you can have women entrepreneurs who are drawn from a very, very socially progressive backgrounds, who've seen the good things in life, who know how to get funds, who know how to start a business. But there are micro entrepreneurs in the millions in India, women entrepreneurs who need the right kind of support. And do they get the right kind of support, or is the entire focus on a few high profile women entrepreneurs who are not getting funded? I mean, that's important as well, and try to ensure that why are some of these women not getting funded? Is it because they are not able to present in the right manner, or they are not able to meet the requirements that the VCs have? Or is it open discrimination or some kind of unconscious bias? Those are important issues to be addressed. But the bigger issue, which often gets neglected, is the millions of micro entrepreneurs, women, who can actually demonstrate entrepreneurship, provided they get the right kind of support. They need the right kind of funding. For example, if you just give them a loan of 15 lakhs, 10 lakh rupees, that's enough for them to start a business. Even that loan is difficult to come by. Can you simplify processes where banks and other institutions can create lending to women entrepreneurs, can create lending to self-help groups, women self-help groups, so that the risk of default is low. So I think it's very important to figure out how to enhance mass entrepreneurship among women, and not just focus on a few things of a certain set of entrepreneurs. I think the other thing is also that the biggest problem amongst startups and even progressive corporates is that at an entry level, mostly in corporate functions, there is a pretty much equal participation of women. So it's almost 40, 60, 45, 55, 40, 40, 50, that's the kind of ratio that we would have. But as people progress, there is a serious drop off. So women tend to drop off from the workforce for various reasons. India has been a youthful nation, as all of us know. We talk of demographic dividend, which means compared to the other countries which have completely aged, including China, India is a young country, which means that there are children at home needing, proper continuous care. That's one of the reasons why in India the participation of women in the workforce is a bit lower than in many other countries. And I'm not saying this is the only reason. All I'm trying to say is that this is a very complex problem. Creating gender parity, gender equality, gender diversity is extremely complex. And how do you, for example, get women into senior management? This is a big challenge for many of these startups companies. If you look at Big Basket itself, in the entire management team of Big Basket, there is not a single woman. So it's a problem that is for a company that I'm a part of. So it's not very easy, and these are difficult things. And coming back to your last sub question, which is about what individuals can do, what companies can do. I think what companies and individuals, leaders like all of us can do, what individuals like us can do is certainly, pick, let's say, 20 women that we will all support for 20 years so that they can get into CXO roles. So handhold all of them, cheerlead them, coach them, teach them, mentor them, and do that at a personal level. And companies can also ensure that there are a few role models who get into very senior positions, because that will create a tipping point. If you don't get women into CXO roles, whatever else you may do, I think those are all measures that will result in incremental improvement. I've always believed, in life, for organizations, for startups, a few strategic choices, few strategic decisions have disproportionate impact. And I think for companies, one strategic choice that they need to make is take some affirmative action. I know that this will create a divide. There are people who will always argue that merit trumps everything else. But I am a strong proponent. I can talk about it offline, which is, I think affirmative action is very, very critical to take when it comes to women leaders. And getting a few of them into CXO roles is absolutely essential if companies are to create role models and show progress. So I'll pause here, Rishi.
Thank you, Hari. Thank you very much. Before I summarize your points to us, is there anybody else from the panel who would like to probably support, add, or supplement to what Hari mentioned?
Yeah, maybe Hari, great points raised by Hari. He's obviously done a lot of in-depth work, so I don't think I can match even an iota of his knowledge. But I think the 2 or 3 positive things that at least I see in a little more privileged technology startup entrepreneur ecosystem is some form of affirmative action happening, right? So we have some of the large venture capital funds like Sequoia and Axel that have made women cohorts and funding set us out separately for women founders, right? So it may be people who are coming from a slightly different background than what Hari spoke about, but there is that push that we need more women entrepreneurs in the ecosystem, and you are seeing, venture capital firms doing it. The government of India, in partnership with NASSCOM, has started a women, startup awards where you give cash rewards, felicitate them, help create more role models. So I'm not sure it's tokenism, but at least it's a start, right? So I think there is a few good things happening, but I totally agree with Hari's point that it's not a simple subject because the social fabric of India is just so diverse. So one has to account for that. We can't say just because X number of women work in a company that we are very gender. There's a lot of gender parity in the organization. It's much more complex than that.
Fully appreciate your view, Sangeeta, and I think Hari also made us believe that take one sector, as a different sector rather than generalizing the whole element. But one important point which came out was that you look at women in entrepreneurship and women in entrepreneurial ventures to be separate. So I think what we heard is that where does the micro entrepreneurship, which can effectively be led by a generation of women going in India. So if getting a 10 lakh rupees loan is still excruciatingly painful for a female micro entrepreneur, and somebody would want a male family member to still endorse or sign the document, that cultural challenge definitely exists. And the other interesting part with conversation from both of you says that when the levels in the organization change, so from new joinee to individual contributor to first time manager to middle management, the drop off starts to come, but the affirmative actions are not in place to ensure that the holes keep on getting plugged immediately. So very interesting point of view, both Hari and Sangeeta. And I'll stick with you, Sangeeta, for a little time for our next conversation, because it takes forward what you discussed right now in terms of the initiatives that NASSCOM is taking with the government as well. So if you read a lot of reports on what's happening around the world, they say that women are increasingly turning to
Rishi, I lost the last sentence.
Technology to reduce gender equality, but they still believe that between the genders a gender digital divide exists. So in terms of women upskilling themselves, their views, and
We lost you completely, Rishi, I think.
By use of technology. You can share some thoughts on that, please.
So Rishi, I lost a lot. Your internet was not very stable, so I'm not sure I got all of the question. But broadly, what I think you're asking is really, technology is both inclusion as well as a divisor, right? In some ways for a country like India, and how can we build a more gender inclusive environment leveraging technology? So that's the larger question from what I gathered that you spoke about. So I'll maybe, just a little bit, because I represent NASSCOM and represent a large number of technology companies in India. I'll spend a minute talking about that industry, and then focus on the technology inclusion side of the question that you spoke about. So clearly, if you look at, and like Hari said, you have to think of it as a sector. So if I see the technology sector in India, there's at least far greater awareness about building a diverse workforce, right? And it has existed for the last decade or so. So it's not, I'm sure Avneet agrees with me. It's something that has existed and is imbibed from maybe some of the practices of the global multinationals that set up in India. But today, every company has a more structured diversity practice where they have policies, programs, coaching, mentorship, etc., available to help women not only enter the workforce but stay there. Yes, there is still a very strong leaking pipeline that Hari spoke about, where we are losing women at the middle and senior management level, and that continues to be a problem that we need to fix. I think the other issue we are increasingly seeing is that as digital technologies are becoming much more mainstream, women in AI or women in blockchain, there is a divide that is even coming in some of these newer technology areas. So there's clearly gaps that are slightly, there is a leadership gap that is existing, and there is a technology gap that exists in the industry. So obviously, we're working very closely with our members on starting out specific cohorts of women technologists who can be upskilled, mentored in these new technology areas. It's still very small cohorts, but we'd like to see how we can really expand that. As an industry, we employ almost 1.5 million women, right? So that's not a small number. If we could retain and grow them, then maybe 5-7 years from now, we would have many more women to join Hari's company in the middle and senior management as we looked at it. So clearly, I think the focus of staying the course, right, and hybrid work provides some of that opportunity if leveraged well. So today, for all the social reasons that Hari spoke about, if we can create that environment where women can provide flexibility in their workplace during those years when they have to either take care of their children or higher studies, it can create an environment where you can retain, these women who were leaving for family and social reasons. But I think the jury's out on that. We yet have to see how hybrid really plays out, whether it will be effective or whether that will create its own divide, right? So I think that is, again, not an answer there. Having learned from how we worked in the pandemic, there is lessons to be learned there. So if I was to summarize that part of it, I think as an industry, our starting metrics are good, but there needs to be completely affirmative action to bring more women at senior middle levels, so that we can change the fabric of this industry more entirely. At NASSCOM, we're very happy. We have a lot of women. Our president is a woman, our chairperson is a woman, and Upasana, to your point, we used to call chairman NASSCOM, so we had to change it and say chairperson NASSCOM. So there is that fabric that is changing, and I think we can see the change that's bringing to us as an organization. I think the second part of what you said is equally more important, right? Technology, given how digital is becoming, like how you buy, how you shop, what you do, it's become so critical. So even building out basic digital literacy for women, right? Helping them understand, if I need to shop on Big Basket, how do I do it? So that's, again, initiatives that a lot of our companies are partnering with NGOs, including the NASSCOM Foundation, to help women become more digitally literate. Again, lots to be done, but there is effort around that. I think the second important point to the micro entrepreneurs that Hari spoke about, many of them can leverage these channels of online commerce to be able to sell their products and solutions to a much wider market than they are able to do today. So again, that requires digital enablement, requires a proper sustained plan. I know larger companies are doing it too. They are bringing more and more sellers onto their platform. The government is creating something, but I think it has to be much more inclusive. We have tons and tons of great micro entrepreneurs in India, whether it's rural artisans or women who are creating handicrafts, etc., and many more, right? And I'm just taking, like, saw this lovely example of mushroom farming by a woman entrepreneur in remote part of the country, and with the pandemic, her business was coming to a stop. How can technology and e-commerce enablement actually help her to reach the markets she could not, because the whole other world, the physical world, was almost at a halt. So there is a lot of work to be done. Initial baby steps are being taken, but technology can be a great enabler, and I hope it doesn't become create a bigger divide than it has. So.
Totally endorse your views, Sangeeta. And what I could hear also is that the practice of diversity and inclusion in a structured way is already coming in. NASSCOM is anyway taking it forward in the sector. But does hybrid become inclusive, or does hybrid become another divide? I think it's a very pertinent thought, which we all can have our individual views to it. But I'm sure in the larger ecosystem, when the whole world went hybrid, we might not have thought about, will it be a facilitator, or will it can actually increase the divide? And in terms of reinforcing what Hari had also mentioned, micro entrepreneurship by women can actually be a lead, and technology will play a role. So if we have structured, stable networks all around the world, probably selling something online by a women entrepreneur will not be extremely difficult. So what I'll do is I'll just connect your thought to what probably I would prefer to touch base with Amit for the conversation, building on what you and Hari had mentioned in terms of practices of building gender parity. So Amit, in your opinion and the diverse work that you've done, there are some statistics you already know that the global average of women participation in workforce is around 15%, 20 to 23%. But more importantly, when you look at the productivity of organizations which are more inclusive and with more gender parity, they see that companies with more open representation have achieved 52% higher productivity, 40% better customer retention, 20% more profitability. I think it's a dream come true for any company. What more would they need by having better diversity practices? Still, with the positives so well known, why does gender disparity really happen, and why are Indian enterprises not able to come closer to bridging the gender gap to international level? Your experience, what can you share with us?
Sure. So that's a very interesting point you make, Rishi, right? Which is that if everything's working and the benefits of what we're trying to do is so evident, then why do we do it? And to that, I would say that the question in fact answers itself, or the conundrum in fact presents itself at 2 or 3 levels. One is, I think, the way Hari really called out, right? Diversity, and I think I don't know if this sounds a little provocative, but diversity in some ways is like climate change, right? And what I mean by that is that we can either see it as a problem solved by legislation, or by government, or by larger action, or by large conglomerates, large corporates, or at an individual level. And the challenge is that I think everyone waits for someone else to make the big move, right? But if you look at it from a point of view of a solution or for some of these things, I mean, we go back to our children and say that the best way to kind of start thinking about climate change is not necessarily worrying about what's not in your control, but it's like planting 2 trees in your backyard on your birthday, right? Every year, right? If you start doing that, then you are doing what your bit is about. So if you want to extend that logic, if I use the term into a diversity perspective, I think the challenge at social level essentially is around, I would say at 2 levels. One is to say, what kind of work do we see as appropriate for women to do? And let me share a quick story that we have from a joint venture that we have called Tata Starbucks, right? The starting premise of Tata Starbucks essentially was that at the end of the day, it's about an experience that you have over a cup of coffee or anything that you. So Tata Starbucks really is about that experience. Now, if you start going across the country and find a set of stores, you will find that there are some stores that clearly call out saying we are proud to say that we are an all-women store only. And this is there across multiple sets of stores. Now, this has been an incredibly hard journey because a lot of people who work in some stores come from the less privileged, parts of society. So therefore, to go and say that you therefore have to first of all work, second of all work sometimes in potentially in a shift scenario, third work in what effectively gets seen as a retail outlet, hence selling coffee, is a huge challenge. And we've had situations wherein parents and elders of the families, etc., haven't spoken to the girls, or the baristas who are working at the store, saying that we would rather not have you work than to work in a scenario like this. So, I mean, and to go back to, I think, the point that Hari made, sometimes what this involves is a deep, strong commitment that you have to make, which is to say that I'm okay even if the store opens a little later than my planned opening date, but I will not do it without it being an all-women store. Yeah. So what happens is at some stage, commitment should drive economics. And once we get to that stage, and it's in small ways, right? I mean, it's just about one store, if you were to look at it, which is an approach that one would take. Things will kind of start happening, and the needle will kind of start moving in some way. In the consumer products business, it becomes a no-brainer, right? Because women influence or impact 80-90% of your buying decisions. So it makes obvious sense to have more women on this side of the table compared on the other side. But what happens, for example, if you say that a large part of the consumer business today gets run, and with due respect to everything that Hari said, 65-70% of our business will continue to be through general trade. Yeah, it will not be through modern trade or e-commerce, which means that business will not necessarily, for this next several years in India, will not happen in Bombay, Delhi, and Hyderabad. It will happen in Rehala, Behala, Shambhupura. Right? Now, to service these areas, you have to go to a distributor. You have to go to a sub-distributor. Ensure that your product and availability is there. The question is that a corporate can take a view to say, I will therefore not put women executives into these areas because they are inaccessible or difficult or whatever, and therefore I will, not do that. And then when it comes to being able to promote women to be able to take on these roles, then you say you don't have the requisite sales experience because you didn't take that step. Yeah. So, sometimes it's about being able to make the investment in the right places. So to come back, what I would say is that the key thing in my view that we need to solve for is not equality of outcomes, but equality of opportunity. So this whole concept of what is a level playing field is something we've got to really think hard about. It's like my saying that I watch 99% of TV and my wife watches 1%, and my wife does 99% of housework and I do 1%, so we are even. Right. So sometimes I think the difference between causality and correlation is something that we've got to really think about. So being able to solve for this essentially involves a lot of men, if I'm use the term, to really recognize that there is strong business value to be delivered, but this is not like running a sprint. Yeah, and the world is fashionably inclined towards stints, towards sprints. I mean, we would all know Usain Bolt, but if I were to ask who, anybody else in the short runs, but if I were to ask who won the men's marathon or the women's marathon, in the last couple of Olympics, no one recalls that, right? So we've got to recognize that this is a marathon. It's going to take us time, but that doesn't mean we should not stay invested. And I think, therefore, to your point, Rishi, I think organizations that have stayed invested for a long period of time and done that commitment are the ones who are beginning to see the results today. I remain optimistic, especially in a country like India, because for the first time last week, we now know that we have 120 women to 100 men. And this is something that's just come out last week. So the point is, we're now getting to a stage wherein we almost virtually won't have a choice. So which means it will no longer remain a nice thing to do, but it will, necessarily become an important, thing to do. And you look at engineering institutes, you look at MBA schools, I mean, again, like I said, maybe sounding a little provocative, but women are beating the crap out of men, right? I mean, UPSC, you look at the list, you look at the CA list. So what I'm saying is the time has come now. We've got to, wherein you're seeing the efforts of people having invested in education for women to kind of come through. I think the time has now come for us to be able to pull this trigger to say that this is, how shall I say, this is necessary and this is not a nice thing to do. And finally, I think diversity has come to not counting the numbers, but to making the numbers count. So I think I remain optimistic that we are at that phase wherein we can really make an impact, but we've got to do it now.
Yes, Avneet, please. Are you on mute, Avneet?
But we can't hear you though, Avneet.
Yes, yeah, I think it was being muted by the organizer. So just, I wanted to add to Amit's point, and I have a personal story to relate here. The tremendous effort that the industry has put in, backed by, of course, the government, the legislation. So we may still think, because we are, our view is still not, across the country per se, right? Our view is still to the organization or the companies that we work with or our immediate ecosystem. I recently traveled to the US, and I had my sister delivered a baby, and we were talking about what is the sort of maternity leave that you get. And I can't tell you how proud I was of India and of the fact that the government has backed 6 months maternity leave and all of the other things that the government has put in place to facilitate women to continue to be in the workforce and not to drop off. I think it is great, because a lot of companies in the US just give you 2 weeks to a 6 week sort of maternity leave. Whereas with India, we are even at 3 months, we were far ahead. But with 6 months, I think it's a huge leap. So you're absolutely right, Amit. I think a lot of the efforts that each one of us have been putting in as companies, right, one step at a time, has really led to this whole ecosystem slowly but surely going in the right direction. So I think, as a country, we are definitely progressive in these terms than some of the countries that are perceived to be very, very progressive in general, right? Like the US.
No, thanks so much, Avneet. And sorry, I'll just take 30 seconds if you don't mind, Rishi.
Sure.
I think, the point essentially is, for example, it's interesting to know why is the number 26 weeks. And I can talk to you about that because, as the Tatas, we actually work with the government, to kind of influence some of that thinking. Very often it's about pulling a number out of a hat, right? Is 12 weeks okay? 16 weeks okay? What is the right number? So when we actually did this, we went back and spoke to, for example, the Nurses Association in the UK. We spoke to the Association of Physicians in the US. We spoke to doctors in India. And what everyone said is that, for the first 26 weeks, the most important nutrient for a child to grow actually is mother's milk. And therefore, when you do that on a continued basis, it is important for the development of the child. As it kind of comes out, there is scientific proof that shows this. It also helps in terms of, how is it that children achieve milestones and things like that. So when you start looking at it from the point of view of a larger social context to say, do you want your children to be healthier, as they grow up, automatically you go back and say, therefore, this is not an economic or a commercial decision, but this is a larger social decision that you've got to stay invested in. So, it's like you've got to change the thinking on how you approach this a little bit. I understand I understand the economics of commerce, right? But this is the, how shall I say, this is almost the freakonomics of socialism, that one, or society, if I'm using the term, that one's got to think about when you approach a subject like this. Because like I said, diversity is a social subject. It's not just an organizational or corporate subject. So sorry, that took a little longer than 30 seconds, but the point brings out the passion, if I'm using the term. Sorry, back to you, Rishi.
It's extremely valuable. Thank you, both of you, for your conversation. And the element of the 6 months maternity leave, maybe during the conversation, the next 10 minutes, I'll request if Hari and Sangeeta also participate, because I know the startup ecosystem at one point of time was up in arms to say that we will reduce hiring women, because if there is a 6 months maternity leave policy by the government, and people have gone on television, and I know people who have openly said that we just cannot, because we are short on funds and we are short on time. And also, maybe in the course of the conversation, it will be very good to hear your opinions, because I'm sure the dust would have settled. And what Amit also spoke and Avneet supported was that it's no longer a good to have gender parity. It's a must have based upon whatever are the gender ratios going. And where is the problem is a very pertinent question. Is it like we are just waiting for somebody else to take initiative? And just on a lighter note, at least coming to who watches TV and who does homework, at least for watching TV, my mother wins hands down. So there's no competition there. But with the audience, I can also empathize with the catch-22 we are in terms of what happens first after the other. So thank you all of you for that. And Amit, let me come to you, building upon the conversation you said. So I saw this, interesting quote by Maya Angelou. It says that it is important for us to recognize and celebrate our heroes and sheroes. So it is about maybe letting them know that the word heroes itself runs into a gender, and why is it that we equally don't celebrate heroes and sheroes? And in the Indian workplace context, do we celebrate the achievements of women as much as we do for men, and at all levels, as we discussed earlier, right from an individual contributor to a CXO, from being an employee to a leader? Is there unbiased approach in celebrating milestones, and is it equally unbiased when appraisal processes happen? Your thoughts on that will be very helpful to us.
Sure. Thank you, Rishi, for that question. So, I wouldn't say that there is an absolute perfect world when it comes to, any sort of unconscious bias, whether it's terms of reward or recognition, or we would say, as a matter of fact, even in the appraisal system. As going back to as fundamental as the choice of words we use associated with male employees versus female employees, and there is that unconscious bias that comes in, we're choosing words of more nurturing sort of words for women versus more, physical strength sort of words that we used, or acronyms, or even, pre-nouns that we use really for male associates, right? So I wouldn't say that it's a perfect world, that there is no bias. But what we have to do is to recognize that, yes, we have a problem, to acknowledge it, and to continuously work on it, right? We have to, as corporates that we do, it has to be part of our DNA to continuously train our managers. And it's not just men managers, it is also female managers, because a lot of times we've seen it is sometimes women who don't understand other women associates as much as they should, right? Or unconsciously have a bias exactly to the term that, okay, if I hire somebody at so and so stage, I may, depending upon what stage of life they are in, how soon are they to getting married, how soon are they get starting a family, those sort of unconscious sort of biases that come in. So the continuous training and development of leaders is important in all organizations, right? And at all levels, not just at developing managers or senior managers, right? So training and education is important. There is also a need for us to do these gender sensitivity trainings, right? Again, education in there, creating a safe place for women to be able to openly speak up. And the fact that if there are such biases that are coming to their accord, to be able to boldly stand up and say that, yes, I think this is not right, to be able to speak up, right? So that environment you have to create for them to be able to recognize and create a culture where women can openly speak up, right? We have to provide mentorship opportunities as and when in different stages of their career. More so, especially as Hari mentioned, that our problem is not as much as inflow at the bottom of the pyramid sort of role codes, right? It is, or jobs. It is more really as we go up, we start seeing women, to sort of fall off that career ladder, right? So all the more important to provide those mentorship opportunities for them at that stage. And of course, succession planning. And this is one of the best practices that we have from Unisys, right? Is that for every position, and especially when we start with succession planning, mostly the focus is that look at the senior roles. We start from the top to the bottom, right? Focusing that at least your top critical roles, your leadership positions have named successors in the company. So really giving those metrics to the leaders to say that at least 50% of your successor candidates have to be women candidates, right? Not just within the same country that you're in, but also diverse across the globe, especially when you're working with global companies, because that's how the perspectives come in, right? Not just with gender, but overall diversity and inclusivity. As a matter of fact, it's one of our criteria even for promotion process for senior roles, that we look at who were your successor candidates, right? So have we looked in totality at all the successor candidates, and especially now that we've closed the loop that you have to have a woman successor candidate. So therefore, then the opportunity for their growth and promotion and development, they stand an equal chance, right? So those are some of those steps that we have to take. And as you know, this will not happen automatically. There has to be concentrated effort. It has to be it can't anymore be just talk and no action. So whatever we say, we are accountable to meet that. We are publicly talking about issues. We discuss about this. So we are all accountable to deliver to those, right? And these are some of the steps and actions I think we should be able to take to help establish and celebrate our sheroes, right?
No, it's wonderful, Avneet, and I think during the course of conversation with all of you, before I, put and culminate everything with Katy and ask her, questions which are maybe culminations of what all of us have spoken. I think unconscious bias has been spoken more than once. Maybe there is a reason that one needs to keep on triggering the ecosystem to say, are you, unconsciously still getting biased? So maybe at least in my career journey, I have not been provoked and probed enough to say that maybe subconsciously I'm still biased to, taking an action. So I think it's time to call out and maybe even have wallpapers to say that every day morning you see and understand you are neutral rather than being biased. I know one company where a couple of years ago, they created a self-help group where new mothers were coaches to expecting mothers in the same organization. And it worked really well because, that's a competence you just cannot outsource to anyone. So if a lady has just delivered a baby, she's the best person to actually coach an expecting mother. And, it won hearts in the organization and across genders for that matter. So I'm also looking at, such beautiful intentions coming in various organizations where self-help groups themselves demonstrate that what women can do, probably, men will just be beneficiaries above anything else. But let me just culminate everything to you, Katy, in terms of, I read somewhere, I think it was your article, which says that's from being judgmental, become an enabler. So, that was a statement which caught my attention. And in your experience, looking at the unconscious bias, looking at what Amit, Hari, and Sangeeta had mentioned, and Avneet and Upasna had spoken about, what are the gender disparities that you see in the logistics sector per se, and right again from say individual contributor to CXO level, and in your sector of work, what is the recourse? How do you really change things for the better?
Thank you, Rishi, and it really helps to come in the end because I can, benefit from what everybody had said. But we are really late bloomers, so we are not as privileged as some of the other, esteemed panel members that you have seen. So I would say how bad the situation was in 2016. Logistics and supply chain had 5% diversity in the workforce. And it was just a few years after I joined, and I came from an industry where we were already at 30-35%. So it was quite a change for us. Though at Maersk, being a global organization, the journey had started before this time, and so we were slightly, but we were always double or triple of what the industry was. But it was still very contained if you compare it to the other industries. It was in specific jobs, and some of you mentioned, if you are stereotyping, some jobs are good for women and some are not. So just to give you an example, in the warehousing, right, when we started, we had no women. Then they said, okay, maybe in customer service and maybe in surveying we can we can get a couple of them. And but traditionally our industry has been stereotyped as a traditional industry for men, okay, and not something which is befitting a woman. So the mindset, our journey is, we have kind of progressed a lot. We are at 27% diversity for our industry. Maybe that is a great benchmark, but that's not where we'd like to stop, right? So the journey is quite the path ahead is also quite daunting. And it's been a journey of the mindset change, right? From the manager saying that I cannot have a woman in warehouse to I can have it for 2-3 jobs, to now saying, okay, can I now try a all woman warehouse because they're really doing well, and let's try this out. So I really like what Hari mentioned, right? You adopt 20 women, or you adopt a few of these practices and then take it for a few years, right? So he said 20 for 20, which I really liked. um, and and that's how the progression will have to be. And of course the biggest challenge is the unconscious bias, like some of you mentioned, right? So we have been working, we've been doing a lot of enabling policies and practices that we've brought in, but the biggest one is around unconscious bias. And being non-judgmental or dropping your judgmental judgments is not very easy, because we all come from different social fabric, right? And it's kind of woven within us as man or woman, depending on where we come from. And you have to at some point learn to drop your judgments and be open minded. And all of us have this journey. So calling it out, and when I call it out, it's an HR leader or a woman calling it out, right? So where I think our biggest success lies is having more men in the game. And at that time, we were at 20% diversity when we started this, and like 80% of the leaders, maybe even 90% or 95% of the leaders, and 80% of the population was men. So you cannot just start having all these women enabling drives and not include them. So the male ally was our biggest win, and I've seen that they have been able to accelerate the progress a lot. So now our industry is at, I think, 2020 it is 15%, we are at 27%. In some countries like Sri Lanka, we've been able to reach close to 40%. It's about 39, and I'm hoping that we reach 40% soon. But those are things that you can drive to policy. So which progressive organizations or technology companies have done it a way back. And so that we're doing a catch up. But investing in the development, we have a lot of communities around, say, our depots and places like that, empowering women there, right, in working with the communities. Some of these things help to change the overall social fabric. And how do you, so whenever somebody says, okay, CFS 24/7 in a remote location, women can't do it, and I was like, don't even come to with a proposal like this. How do you make it possible? How do you make it a safe place? And a lot of people would take shelter in saying that it's not safe for women, and what will happen and things like that, or the families will not agree and things like that. Okay, that's a challenge, so what do we do about it, right? So that mindset, it's a journey. It's been completely a journey of mindset, I would say, for us. How do you change that, and how do you then start looking for solutions? You spoke about this 26 weeks for women, right? So how do you also degenderize some of these things? Now, like childcare, for us, when 26 weeks for women was announced, I was actually on maternity. I went on TV. I was on one of the channels, and I spoke about this. Why is there no paternity leave? Because there's a nuclear family, there's a small baby, the husband is going, then it's still the woman's responsibility to do it, right? So while we are better than US, and I had my first baby there. So I was fortunate when I had the second baby, though it was still before 6 months. But when I look at Europe, they have a full 1 year that is given to parents, and you can choose how much the husband wants to take, how much the wife or the partner wants to take, not even that, right? So that kind of balance, how do we get that? So that degenerization is what we are now focusing on. Most of our policies, we are making it equal for men and women. So if there's a childcare facility that is available, it's not just like daycare for women, but it's also for men. So involving both sides is very important. Then the other thing that Upasna mentioned, right, on your son saying manpower, right? And I have a 13-year-old, and they don't say she or he most of the times. If you notice, their language is very inclusive. They say they. The first time she said it, I was like, how many kids are coming? And she said only one, but I don't know what is her preference, what is the preference that he or she has, so I call it they. So like, so their language, their thought process. So when you have more generational diversity as this come, I do feel that we'll become more inclusive in our overall approach. So I'm quite hopeful from that aspect as well. And To sum it up, I think that you will have to have these flexible policies and that moments that matter for women, to include them more and more. But as more leaders, as more of your men allies come into place, then you will see the real mindset change. And I'm seeing it, in a big way in India, but in a much bigger way in, for example, Bangladesh. We had single digit diversity in workforce 3 years back. Now I have almost close to India. It's 26% for me in Bangladesh. So the social fabric is changing, and the corporates have to work together with them to kind of get more and more women in the workforce. And it's true for our industry much more than others, because we are playing catch up as I see when I see other industries as well.
I think it's been an amazing view that you have put up. And actually, I can't recall what happens when an individual who has seen 35-40% diversity moving into a sector with 3 to 5% diversity cope up. So I think kudos to you for also holding fort and taking it ahead, rather than saying, let me maybe go back to what was more comfortable. So thank you for that. And just in the interest of time, I may not be able to approach all of you for the culminating remarks. I've been told that I've overstepped my time as well. And in terms of the general consensus that we created, one is equality is like it's a must-have. It is not something which is in the individual's choice. The mindset will still continue to play a very important role, and it is good for us to keep on reminding everybody around that, are you really getting biased? Maybe they just don't want to, but that is the way the future works, and it is always going to remain a journey. The kind of diversity in culture also that we have as a country at large, but micro entrepreneurship and how do you make it so easy for women to actually become on your own appears to be something which I think collectively all of us as an agenda can take it forward. And some minor anecdotes which we discussed about self-help groups on women helping women move ahead. And to your point, Katie, specifically, women-centric and male participation to increase appears to be another interesting conversation. I can tell you that when I look at the coaching and mentoring ecosystem, I see a lot of balance and equality there. Probably female coaches are much better than us being impulsive and the way we do our coachings. But I still see in the classroom when I teach HR, I still believe I would want to see more boys over there rather than maybe just a couple of them over there. And has it been compartmentalized that HR is predominantly for women? And as you mentioned, there are some places where male participation has to increase, and it changes from the parents' mindset only. So, I mean, on behalf of all of us, and Upasana, thank you very much for joining us on the session as well. Hari, Avneet, Sangeeta, Katie, and Amit, I really, really appreciate all the time that you have given us today. I'm sure there's a lot to talk, but I mean, let's keep on connecting and improvising. And I would thank the entire team at GI Group who put this event together. At the back, they have really worked relentlessly to get all of us connected, and the audience who patiently waited and heard all of you for the last 1 hour. My expression of gratitude to them as well. So I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll also brace the reins in the city today. But once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, and look forward to staying connected. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you for having us. Thank you, Rishi. Thank you, Upasana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.